There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me. Right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown. And this week we're going to be continuing our look at the Best Supporting Actor category by breaking down the 2000s Best Supporting Actor winners, tier ranking them from S tier being the highest all the way to D tier being the lowest. We got some great S tier stuff, particularly in the later good run of winners in this decade. But starting off a little bit slow, you'll have to see the full video to check out my rankings. And as always, I really appreciate the support you guys have been showing for this series, one of my better performing series in terms of views and engagement and whatnot, and I really enjoy that kind of stuff. I really do enjoy your guys' commenting below what your tier rankings are, so please to continue to do that. I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are, even if you disagree. Maybe, you know, that's totally fine as well. Just love to hear your thoughts. But without further ado, let's jump into things, because these things can get a little bit long. Starting off with the 2000 winner, Benicio del Toro in Traffic. And at the time, Traffic was seen as the sort of crowning achievement of Steven Soderbergh. He had this and Aaron Brockovich in the same year, and then the next year does Ocean's 11, and he's, you know, pretty much the king of Hollywood during this time. And it's a movie that I don't think has aged totally the best, in part just because it's such an interesting product of its time, and in certain ways you go, well, it's maybe not as universal as it seemed at the time, but in a unique way. I appreciate the fact that if you want to see a movie about, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s, you look at this movie in the same way you look at something like American Beauty, and people may say, hey, that's a movie that hasn't held up very well, but that may be true, but that doesn't mean it's not an accurate portrayal of the 90s. And I have a similar relationship with Traffic as well, because it's almost a prototypical Steven Soderbergh film in that there's so much experimentation, lots of experimentation about you know, the color grading being the most obvious example, and the sort of three different storylines we see very popular this time. Another upcoming movie, Syriana, I think does a similar thing. And the experimentation, and particularly some of the really heavy, strong color grading, I don't think totally works. That being said, there are certain moments of this film that overcome some of the experimentation, some of the dated elements of the film, and I think in particular Benicio del Toro's character and performance here is one of those examples. He's a very unique male character because I think he is both sex appeal and danger, and also sort of wholesomeness as well. He is almost like a male femme fatale, I think, in this movie, because he's working as a policeman in Mexico, but because there's not sort of an organized police force, they have to sort of work with the cartels, and you don't know how much he's being compromised and how much he's trying to cooperate within the system to get, you know, small gains, and whether or not he's doing things for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. Particularly throughout the film, you're unsure exactly how to feel about this character, and Benicio sort of toes that line of giving you some scenes which indicate his maybe more suspicious activities, but then some scenes very sort of familial and wholesome, but you're not exactly sure when you're watching the movie where his allegiances lies, which I think adds a sense of tension to the film, which I appreciate. And Del Toro's really able to sort of play with that ability and that idea, and not try to give you too much in certain scenes. It's constantly sort of changing his performance to sort of psych you out in certain instances. So for me, the best parts of the movie are Del Toro and his storyline, and when the moments he does actually get to shine in the movie, he is very terrific in it. So for me, it will go into the B tier. Then the 2001 winner, Jim Broadbent, for Iris, about the author Iris Murdoch, and sort of dueling storylines about her and her husband meeting, and then also in later years with the relationship between her and her husband as she starts to develop Alzheimer's. And Jim Broadbent plays her husband in the later years. And in the sort of first half of the movie, because we get so much flashbacks and because we get early days of Alzheimer's, he is very much sort of a simple, sort of doting husband, does get a lot to do, particularly in the sort of last third of the movie, I'd say. I think Broadbent really gets to show off his skills and why he was, you know, considered for this award, because it's not a traditional Alzheimer's kind of a story. In terms of just how almost, I'd say, sad and cynical some of the film can get, particularly towards the end, and that's communicated through Broadbent's character, because we see that at the beginning this sort of jovial, happy, kind of a doting husband turn, very pessimistic turn, sort of angry and sad, and we do get sort of those different modes from Broadbent very quickly, sort of coming to face with the realization, and then, you know, being such, you know, saddened, and then also sort of frustrated and angry and cynical that this happened to him. And we think of, at least I do, think of Broadbent mostly as a jovial kind of a character. I think he is great at that. But to see him sort of transform and become sort of angry and frustrated and solemn at the end is a testament to his range in this film, and a testament to his acting, that it's believable, that we see the sort of toll that this is taken on this man. You see a movie like Still Alice, very much focused on, of course, Alice who's going through that, but this movie sort of take a little bit of a different approach, and to see things through his perspective, I thought was an interesting take, and Broadbent was able to shoulder a lot of those themes by showing that progression, and does both equally as good. The sort of loving husband part at the beginning, but then turning into the more disenfranchised, I guess, viewpoint of life near his end, and angrier part of his life. So I thought a believable shift and a worthy performance. So for me, it will go into the B tier. Then the 2002 winner, Chris Cooper, for Adaptation. And I think a lot of people, when they think of this movie, they think of Charlie Kaufman and the sort of unique script that he is able to deliver on, and the Nicolas Cage, you know, twin playing the same person, playing two different people, by the same actor kind of stuff. But I think Chris Cooper is the sort of secret rare orchid in this movie. And he's an actor that doesn't have a huge leading man career. He's always been a supporting actor and a character actor, and is great in this role and in so many of these roles. But this one, I think, is a true transformative performance from Cooper in particular. He's probably my standout reason of the film, and it's almost under discussed, so I do want to talk about what makes him so great in this film. Playing the eccentric horticulturalist who is the basis of Susan Orlean's book, whose book is the basis of the adaptation that Charlie Kaufman's trying to make. And the fascination of the book and the fascination of the movie is, as written, that LaRoche is this fascinating character. Now, it's one thing to write on a piece of paper, oh, this is the most interesting man in the world, the whole book could be centered around them. But then, of course, the actor has to bring that to life. The actor has to make that person seem interesting, and that's what Cooper does here, in that his main characteristic, I think, is that he's sort of carefree. He's intelligent, but sort of an anarchist in his ways to go around the law. But if you look at that sort of central idea of carefree, what he's able to do within the ranges of that, of what that means, is actually very interesting. You see, at the beginning he's carefree, but he's very nervous, and he's almost defensive, and he's almost not exactly sure what to say to Susan Orlean when she first, confronts him and asks her a story about him. He's word vomiting, he's very jittery, he's kind of awkward and nervous. He's carefree because he's just giving her all this information, but doing so in a sort of defense mechanism kind of way, just telling her everything all at once, very quickly, very rapid pace. But then later on, he's also carefree, but now he's more comfortable with Susan. So now it's more of a gentle kind of relationship. It's more of an opening up about himself, not exactly what he's doing, but his past, who he is as a person, why he does this, and with a sort of a, this is me kind of a carefree attitude. So it's interesting to see a character who's written probably as sort of eccentric and carefree, but then Cooper is able to internalize that and interpret that and showcase actually a progression of this character, a person who's gone through an arc, who still has that core being of being carefree, but then as an actor telling us, almost showing us different shades of what that emotion is to ultimately give us that complete emotional arc. That's the fascinating stuff that an actor is able to do and internalize within a part, is to show us these different angles and to bring more than what's just written on the character. So I think a really transformative performance, funny performance at times, but very heartbreaking as well. Chris Cooper is one of the most underrated actors out there, and for me, this is an A-tier performance. Then the 2003 winner, Tim Robbins, for Mystic River. And we talked about Mystic River on the when we were talking about Sean Penn, because he won Best Actor. So in the 2000s Best Actor ranking video, you can hear my thoughts about the movie there. And I'm much more interested in Sean Penn and his dilemma and his character, because Robbins is positioned almost as the co-lead in the movie, but very much so a broken shell of a man, this sort of mysterious giant, this person who's had this unspeakable thing happen to them early on in their career, their life, and then how that, has changed them as a person. So now they're sort of a broken shell of a person. But the problem with that is that because they're a broken shell, they don't really give us anything. There's nothing behind those eyes. And then we're continually waiting for maybe some sort of reveal or some sort of emotional outburst. And we get a confrontation at the very end of the movie, and then that's it. And then the movie sort of ends. So it's a little bit of a frustrating performance, not because Robbins is bad, but just because he's not necessarily asked to do a lot. So maybe that's the appeal of the performance and the appeal of the movie that I think some people may be connected to. But for me, Robbins is not being asked to do a whole lot. Therefore, the performance ultimately for me isn't one of the more memorable ones in the film. And I'm a little bit more befuddled as to why the Academy thought to reward him in this case. So for me, the performance will go into the C tier. Then in 2004, we have Morgan Freeman winning for $1 Million Baby. I've talked about this movie twice already because it won Best Picture and because Hilary Swank won, so I'm not going to talk about it too much in depth. Just to say that I think this was maybe almost its time kind of reward for Morgan Freeman. He'd been nominated 3 times before, so it felt like it was his time to do it. Seems like more of a reward for his great narration in the film, more so than his role, because he has a very small role within the film. And even fans of this movie, which I'm not a huge fan of, even them I think would be able to recognize that if you like the movie, it's Swank and Eastwood's relationship and the ending that's so impactful, more so than it is Freeman's role. He's just not very much in it, kind of a standard Freeman performance. Let's just say, it's not to say it's bad, it's just not very notable at all. So for me, this one will go into the D tier. Then the 2005 winner, George Clooney for Syriana, which is not going to be one of Clooney's most memorable performances because I don't think it does what Clooney's able to do best. That being said, it does showcase another side of Clooney that I don't think a lot of people thought he had, which was a very serious, uncharismatic, sort of everyman kind of a role, which I thought he did well here, playing a CIA field agent who sort of gets things done in the Middle East, and we see him go do some field work have to go behind a desk, then go back into the action, and his sort of dealings and no-nonsense kind of approach to things. And that's what I think this performance is well suited, particularly to this movie, because the movie is all about backroom dealings. It's all about getting things done. It's not about action necessarily. It's just about how do we get something done? This is what someone wants to get done. Let's try to do this in the most sort of practical, logical way possible, bureaucratic, staying within certain bureaucratic laws. And I think Clooney does that as well. There's no humor to this performance. There's no sort of inside jokes or whatnot. It is very sort of transactional. The dialogue is quick and rapid and concise, and Clooney doesn't add so much more to that, but that's because the performance is not asking him to do that, and he fits within, I think, the tone of the movie and what the movie is ultimately trying to be. There is a certain type of dialogue and pace that's being required for this movie. I think Clooney matches that very well. So I can't say it's one of Clooney's best performances just because I like so much of his great charm, and when we don't get that, sometimes you feel like you're missing something, but for showing a different side of his acting style and being well suited to the film, that performance is absolutely true. So for me, it will go into the B tier. Then we have the 2006 winner, Alan Arkin for Little Miss Sunshine. Unfortunately, recently deceased, and so it required me and decided to rewatch a lot of his movies, and sort of interesting to see it from a career perspective, because he's been making great comedy movies since the 60s and 70s. But with Little Miss Sunshine, what I think he really enters into and sort of cruises throughout the last part of his career with this and with Argo and eventually into the Kaminsky Method is a sort of grumpy old man, which was a certain element part of his persona, but I think definitely accentuated in these later parts of the film. And what's great about this performance is that it is a secretly terrific movie star performance, in that Alan Arkin knows his complete arc of his character. And when you know that going into the movie, you see certain subtle things that Arkin's able to do that considers the ultimate fate of his character. In that, there's some parts early on in the movie where he has to be grumpy, where he has to give some insults and be kind of crabby. But a certain actor would maybe make the mistake of going too hard into those insults, making them hit really hard and be really impactful. And then that would hurt their ability to be more sweet in the end. But what Arkin's able to do is take those insults and maybe say them under his breath or say them a little more sarcastically, because he knows that his character needs to have that redemption. His character needs to be sweet and has to help the audience understand that this guy's not just a terrible guy. So he takes those insults and more just sort of offhand little sort of crappy one-liners that maybe not everyone necessarily hears, so that it's more believable at the end when he has more of that emotional turn and has a relationship with Abigail Breslin's character, Olive, or has a sort of one-to-one with his son. So Arkin's able to have that. It's not maybe a traditional acting talent, but it is, I think, kind of a movie star talent to know how hard to hit those insults early on, so that they're still impactful at the time, but that people don't totally lose you and hate you as a character, so that the emotional stuff and the turn doesn't necessarily work as well in the later parts of the film. Little smart things like that, I think Arkin's really smart at, and particularly, I think, exemplified in a movie like this. So for me, a great performance. Even though he really isn't in a lot of the movie, he is impactful for what he is in a solid performance that will go into the B tier. Then these next three performances, these next three wins are all sort of villainous type roles that I do sort of see in a similar grouping. Starting off here with the 2007 winner Javier Bardem for No Country for Old Men, the robotic, sociopathic, inevitable killer. He is an iconic villain. I think these next three performances as well are also iconic villains, but starting off with Javier Bardem as Anton Chigurh. Of course, it's a really beautifully written part, and the hairstyling and does so much to, and even just the cow sort of bolt gun that he has, all these eccentric kind of things that add to his character. So it's a really well written character. But what I think Bardem is so great at doing is understand the sort of haunting, inevitable part of this character. That he is, because he's one of the three storylines, he sort of lingers over the other storylines as well. He is this sort of inevitable force that is always sort of creeping and coming, and we'll get one storyline with Josh Brolin, and we'll go, oh, that was a smart thing to do. And then we see Javier Bardem, and we realize maybe it wasn't that smart because he was able to figure it out, and he's on his tail. And we have that sense of dread that's so powerful throughout the film. And he's able to understand that theme and role within his character, and mirror that with his acting style and match that with his acting style by having very controlled movements. You never see him flailing. He's always walking very slowly, very consistently. His movements are very controlled and considered. And that just makes him even more sociopathic because he's not sort of impacted by some of the gunshots or the tension of certain scenes. He just is someone who is going to get the job done no matter what. And then even when you look at his face, he has this sort of blank stare, very rarely blinking. Many times trying to, I'm sure on the set of the movie, reducing dialogue because he wants to sort of, he understood that as an actor, this character's role, and wants to emphasize that in every case. So you're given a role that's supposed to be the inevitable sort of growing, the sort of fear of death. Okay, well then be controlled. Well then don't blink. Okay, well then walk very slowly to sort of emphasize and add on to what's already a well-written character. It's a smart little decision that Javier is able to do, and I think completely embodies this just in his blank stare and his body movements. Subtle, very much so, but excellent nonetheless. So for me, it'll go into the S tier. Then the 2008 winner, Heath Ledger for The Dark Knight, one of the great actors lost too young, and for me the definitive portrait of the Joker. And the Joker is a secretly kind of a hard character to play because he is a man who wants to watch the world burn, which as an actor may be difficult because, well, what are his motives? What are his motivations? Why is he doing things the way he's going to do things? You don't necessarily know. So what Ledger does, and what Ledger does to make him an interesting character, is just by making him unpredictable. He's able to take what a normal human being would do and in every sort of turn make the opposite choice. He doesn't walk necessarily traditional. He doesn't laugh traditionally. He doesn't look traditionally. He'll always lean in, tilt his head, licking his lips, having that sort of iconic laugh. These all are moments that are iconic at a time when someone, sort of licks their lips because they have these scars, you immediately think of the Joker and that kind of a psychotic portrayal. And that's because it was just a series of smart, small choices to take a look at this character of the Joker who is entirely unpredictable, whose tension comes from being unpredictable, from not doing what everyone else thinks he's going to do. Either he's going to burn the money, or he's going to kill this guy, or he's not going to kill this guy. You don't know. So Heath is able to take that great character and then just make every single decision, think about, okay, what does a normal person do? All right, let's do the opposite. Or let's do something slightly off. Let's surprise the audience in that way. And just continually, every smart decision builds and builds and builds and creates, ultimately, this really interesting character that every time I watch, I've seen it a million times, and I've seen Heath in Brokeback Mountain and, 10 Things I Hate About You and A Knight's Tale and all these great movies. And you still can't see him in the movie. He's just totally transformed into something else entirely. And it's unfortunate this was one of his last performances, because I could see 10 movies with this character. In my mind, the iconic, definitive version of the Joker from one of the best comic book movies of all time. And it's one of the best comic book movies of all time because it's got this performance at the center of it. So for me, deserving win, another S-tier villain performance. And then the 2009 winner, Christoph Waltz for Inglourious Basterds, the third villainous Oscar role in this category to be rewarded. But how could the Academy not? I mean, coming out of nowhere to be in this big Quentin Tarantino movie, and so well depth and so well suited for this movie. And if you compare him to some of the other villain roles that we just discussed, he's not chaotic like the Joker. He's very much in control like Anton Chigurh, but Anton Chigurh is controlled and slow. He's almost sort of controlled and fast. He will use not his physicality, but his words, his dialogue. And Waltz is able to convey that to us through his line deliveries. And his line deliveries here are just absolutely perfect. Whether it be he goes on this long rant, speaking very fastly, until he starts to slow down his words and space it out and redirect his attention and stare you right directly to the lens. And then you start to pick up and realize that, oh, right, he wasn't just doing a story just to tell a story. He was doing a story to give us a message, to bring us back to the center, to inform us that he knew all along where the Jews were or what's going on. He's someone who he's a predator who likes to play with his prey. He likes to be very kind of sadistic and joyous in how much he is evil. And he does that, of course, with the line deliveries, but also a great sort of just facial reaction character as well. And you know that a character is so interesting and an actor is so in command of their character when you're always looking at their reactions, even when someone else is speaking, say, in a wide shot, you're always gravitated towards them. And he always does these interesting things, even when he's not speaking, whether he's, struggling from laughing in the scenes with Brad Pitt as they speak Italian, or whether or not he is trying to intimidate Shoshana, Melanie Laurent's character, in the strudel scene. There's certain instances in which it's just a slight tilt of the head, or an inquisitive lean, or of course he's smoking that comically large pipe that he has. He'll use the props. In this case, Waltz will use the props in smart ways to help us always feel on edge, even though he's not always saying the line deliveries. He always feels like he's in control and that he knows something and he's just playing with you. And that's a tension that builds, adds so much to the success of the movie. So you can't look away even though you want to. So another, iconic villain performance that I have to put it in the S tier, 3 in a row. But take a look at that. Those are my rankings. What do you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. What are your rankings? Lots of B's and then some S's, kind of a great highs and low lows in this decade. Next week, I'm going to be really excited to talk about. I was excited to talk about this week. Next week, maybe even more so. We got Robin Williams and Joe Pesci and lots of fun stuff. I expect that episode to be, lots of high, great performances too as well. But you have to stay tuned to next week for that one. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Once again, comment below, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video, but usually every Monday around 12 p.m. Eastern, you can expect these videos to come out. And if you want to see my other videos, please do check those out. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.